The dust-choked air of Willow Creek, Wyoming whipped around Zachariah Montgomery as he yanked the reins of his chestnut stallion to a halt outside the weathered church. The year was 1878, and the unforgiving summer had scorched the territory for weeks, leaving nothing but parched lips and desperate prayers in its wake. He hadn't planned to stop in this forgotten patch of civilization, but something, perhaps the persistent whisper of his late mother's voice, had drawn him to the modest white steeple rising above the scattered buildings. Zachariah dismounted with the practiced ease of a man who'd spent more hours in the saddle than on solid ground. At 32, his face was tanned and lined from years beneath the relentless western sun. His eyes sharp as a hawk's and just as wary. The war had ended 13 years ago, but he still carried its shadows with him, along with the fading scars across his back and the constant vigilance that had kept him alive as both soldier and cowboy. He tied his horse to the hitching post, removed his hat, and ran a hand through his dark hair before ascending the 3 worn wooden steps to the church entrance. The door creaked open at his touch, revealing a dim interior that smelled of dust and old hymnals. "Hello!" His voice echoed in the empty space. No answer came, but a soft sound like the rustle of fabric against wood drew his attention to a shadowy corner behind the last pew. Zachariah approached cautiously, one hand instinctively hovering near the revolver at his hip. "Is someone there?" The figure curled tighter into itself, and as Zachariah's eyes adjusted to the gloom, he made out the form of a woman. Her dress was threadbare but clean, her hair hidden beneath a simple bonnet. When she lifted her face, he saw trails of tears cutting through the dust on her cheeks. "Miss, are you all right?" he asked, keeping his distance. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I have nowhere else to go." Zachariah knelt, maintaining a respectful space between them. "The church is empty. Is the preacher around?" She shook her head. "He left 2 days ago. Said he was called to a bigger congregation in Cheyenne." Her hands trembled as she clutched a small cloth bundle to her chest. "I've been here since yesterday." "You're hungry," he stated, not a question. The woman's eyes, a startling shade of green, finally met his. "I asked in town for work, any work, but they all turned me away." "Why's that?" Her gaze dropped. "They know who I am, what I was. My husband died in the mines 6 months ago. I tried to keep our room at the boarding house, but..." She swallowed hard. "The owner said I could stay if I provided certain services." Zachariah's jaw tightened. He'd seen enough of the world to know exactly what services meant. "I refused," she continued, "so he threw me out. Told everyone in town I was disreputable anyway. No one will hire me now." Her voice broke. "No one wants me." Something shifted in Zachariah's chest, a feeling he'd thought long buried under years of drifting and survival. Without thinking, he heard himself say, "I do." Her head snapped up, eyes wide with confusion and the barest flicker of hope. He cleared his throat. I'm heading to my brother's ranch near Fort Laramie. He's always looking for help cooking, cleaning, mending. It's honest work." Zachariah paused, realizing how his words might sound to a desperate woman alone in a church with a stranger. "You'd have your own cabin, no strings attached." She studied him with a wariness born of hard experience. "Why would you help me?" Zachariah considered the question. "My ma taught me never to leave someone in need when I had the means to help. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "my brother's cooking might kill us all if someone doesn't intervene." A ghost of a smile touched her lips before fading. "I don't even know your name." "Zachariah Montgomery." He extended his hand. "Friends call me Zach." After a moment's hesitation, she placed her fingers in his. Faith Wilson." Her hand was small but calloused, the hand of a woman who knew hard work. Zachariah felt an unexpected current pass between them at the contact. "Well, Miss Wilson, if you're willing to trust a stranger, I can offer you safe passage to my brother's ranch and a word on your behalf for employment." Faith withdrew her hand and clutched her bundle tighter. "How do I know you're not worse than what I'm leaving behind?" "You don't," Zachariah admitted. "But I swear on my mother's grave that I intend you no harm." He stood and stepped back. "Take some time to think on it. I'll be at the livery stable getting my horse shod. If you decide to come, meet me there in an hour." He turned to leave, then paused. "And Miss Wilson? Whether you come or not, you might want to try the baker's wife for a meal. Mary Baker lost her daughter to scarlet fever last winter. She's got a soft heart for those in need." With that, Zachariah placed his hat back on his head and stepped out into the harsh sunlight, leaving Faith to her decision. The livery stable smelled of hay, horse, and leather, familiar scents that had defined much of Zachariah's life since the war. As the blacksmith hammered a new shoe onto his stallion's hoof, Zachariah leaned against a post and contemplated his impulsive offer. James would likely have his hide for bringing a strange woman to the ranch, but his older brother had a good heart beneath his gruff exterior. Besides, with James's wife expecting their third child, extra help would surely be welcome. "Your horse'll be ready in 20 minutes, the blacksmith called over the rhythmic clanging. Zachariah nodded his thanks and stepped outside to roll a cigarette. As he struck a match against the rough wood of the stable door, he caught sight of a familiar bonnet moving hesitantly down the dusty street toward him. Faith had cleaned her face and straightened her dress as best she could. In one hand, she carried her small bundle. In the other, a cloth-wrapped parcel that he guessed contained food from the baker's wife. "Miss Wilson," he greeted her, quickly dropping his unlit cigarette and grinding it under his boot. "Mr. Montgomery." She stood straighter than she had in the church, dignity evident in the set of her shoulders despite her circumstances. "I've decided to accept your offer, if it still stands." Relief washed over him, though he wasn't entirely sure why. "It does. I want to be clear," she said firmly. "I'm accepting work, not charity, and certainly not anything else." "Understood." He gestured to the stable. "My horse is getting shod. We can leave as soon as he's ready." Faith nodded. "I took your advice about Mrs. Baker. She was very kind." She hesitated before adding, "She also warned me about you." Zachariah raised an eyebrow. "Oh." "She said you're known to be honorable but haunted, that you fought for the Union and don't talk about it, that you visit your brother's ranch once a year but never stay long." Faith's green eyes studied him. "She said I could trust you not to harm me, but that you're not a man who lets anyone close." He felt uncomfortably exposed by this assessment. "Mrs. Baker talks too much. She's worried for me, as a woman alone with a man she doesn't know." "Fair enough." Zachariah glanced back at the stable. "You should know the journey will take 4 days, maybe 5 depending on the weather. We'll need to stop in towns when possible, but there will be nights when we camp under the stars." Faith's cheeks colored slightly. "I understand. I'll sleep on the ground. You can have my bedroll. And I give you my word as a gentleman that your virtue is safe with me." The ghost of a smile returned to her lips. "Mrs. Baker said you'd say something like that." Despite himself, Zachariah found himself smiling back. "Did she now? What else did this town gossip tell you about me?" "That you've never been married. That women try, but you're not interested." Faith's directness was unexpected. "She thinks you're still fighting battles in your head." Zachariah's smile faded. "Maybe I am." He nodded toward the stable. "Horse should be ready soon. Do you need anything else before we leave?" Faith shook her head. "Everything I own is right here." She lifted her small bundle. The simplicity of her statement struck him harder than he expected. Here was a woman who had lost everything: husband, home, reputation, yet stood before him with determination rather than defeat in her eyes. "Then we'll head out as soon as possible," he said, his voice rougher than intended. "The sooner we get to the ranch, the sooner you can start your new life." An hour later, they were riding eastward, Faith seated behind Zachariah on his stallion. He'd fashioned a makeshift side saddle arrangement for her using his bedroll, but she still had to hold onto his waist for balance. Her touch was light, almost reluctant, and he could feel the tension in her arms. "You can hold tighter," he told her as they navigated a rocky stretch of trail. "I promise I don't bite." "I've never ridden like this before," she admitted. "My husband and I had a mule for the garden, but never a horse this size." Thunder's gentle despite his size. "Just don't make any sudden movements and we'll get along fine." They rode in silence for a while, the rhythm of the horse's hooves filling the space between them. Eventually, Faith spoke again. "What kind of ranch does your brother have?" "Cattle mostly. Some horses. He's been building it up since '69. Started with almost nothing after the war, but he's doing well now." "And he'll truly have work for me?" Zachariah nodded. "His wife, Sarah, manages the household, but with a new baby coming and 2 little ones already underfoot, she'll welcome the help." "Can you cook?" "Yes, and so I can garden too if needed. All useful skills at a ranch." He paused. "What did your husband do in the mines?" He felt her stiffen behind him. "Silver. He was a digger. The tunnel collapsed." "I'm sorry." "He was a good man," Faith said softly. "Not perfect, but kind. We were married 4 years. No children." Her hands tightened almost imperceptibly at his waist. "No. It wasn't God's will, I suppose." The pain in her voice stopped him from asking more. Instead, he pointed ahead to where the land began to rise. "We'll make camp in those foothills tonight. There's a creek with clean water." As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the prairie, Zachariah found a sheltered spot near the creek and helped Faith dismount. Her legs were unsteady after hours of riding, and she wobbled as her feet touched the ground. Without thinking, he caught her elbows to steady her. "Easy now." Faith looked up at him, their faces suddenly close. For a moment, neither moved. Then she stepped back, breaking the contact. "Thank you," she murmured, turning away to smooth her skirts. Zachariah busied himself setting up camp, tethering Thunder where he could graze, gathering wood for a small fire. Faith unpacked the food from Mrs. Baker: bread, cheese, and 2 apples, and arranged it on a clean cloth. "It's not much," she said apologetically. "It's a feast compared to jerky and coffee." He sat cross-legged across from her and accepted his share with genuine appreciation. As they ate, the sky darkened to deep blue, then black, stars appearing like pinpricks in velvet. The fire cast a warm glow over them, softening the lines of worry on Faith's face. "Tell me about your brother," she said after they'd finished eating. "What kind of man is he?" Zachariah tossed a twig into the fire. "James is 4 years older. Stubborn as a mule, twice as loud when he's angry. But there's no one I'd rather have at my back in trouble." He smiled at some private memory. He met Sarah in '71. She was teaching at a mission school for the Sioux children, scandalizing the locals by teaching Indians to read alongside white kids. James took one look at her and was done for. "She sounds remarkable." "She is. Changed my brother for the better." They have 2 boys, Peter's 5 and Michael's 3. Faith wrapped her arms around her knees. "And what about you? Why don't you stay at the ranch permanently?" The question hung between them. Zachariah poked at the fire with a stick, watching sparks rise into the darkness. "I'm not cut out for settling," he finally said. I work cattle drives, do some scouting for the army sometimes. I like the movement. Mrs. Baker was right, Faith observed quietly. You are haunted. Zachariah's eyes flicked to hers. Aren't we all? You've got your ghosts too, Miss Wilson. I can see them plain as day when you think no one's looking. She didn't deny it. Instead, she asked, does it get easier? Living with ghosts. You learn to make room for them. He stood, brushing dust from his pants. You should get some sleep. Take my bedroll, I've got my coat. Faith looked about to protest, but exhaustion won out. Thank you, Mr. Montgomery. Zach, he corrected. If we're going to be traveling together, might as well use my name. She nodded. Good night then, Zach. Good night, Faith. He watched as she curled up in his bedroll, her back to the fire. Long after her breathing had deepened into sleep, Zachariah sat awake, keeping watch over their small camp and the woman who had unexpectedly placed her trust in him. The next 3 days fell into a rhythm. They would rise with the sun, share a simple breakfast, and ride until midday heat forced them to rest in whatever shade they could find. Faith gradually relaxed behind him on the horse, her grip on his waist becoming more natural, less tentative. They talked sometimes about the landscape, about the ranch they were heading toward, about books they had read. Faith had been a schoolteacher before her marriage, he discovered, but they both carefully avoided deeper topics, circling around their personal histories like wary dancers. On the third night, they camped near a small trading post where Zachariah was able to purchase supplies: coffee, bacon, beans, and more ammunition for his rifle. The elderly couple who ran the post allowed Faith to bathe in private behind their cabin, a luxury she accepted with tears of gratitude. When she returned to their campfire, her hair was damp and loose around her shoulders, rich chestnut waves that caught the firelight. Without the layer of travel dust, her skin glowed with a healthy pallor that made her green eyes even more striking. Zachariah found himself staring and quickly looked away when she caught his gaze. I feel human again, Faith said, settling across from him. Mrs. Larson even gave me a bar of lavender soap. It suits you, he replied, then cleared his throat awkwardly. Not that you weren't. She laughed, the first real laugh he'd heard from her, and the sound sent an unexpected warmth through his chest. I know what you meant, she assured him. And thank you for everything. Her expression grew serious. I've been thinking about how I can repay you. No need. There is, Faith insisted. You've spent money on supplies, shared your food, given up your bedroll. I have nothing to offer now. But once I'm working at the ranch, Faith, he cut her off gently. Consider it a loan between friends if that makes you feel better. You can repay me when you're settled. She studied him in the firelight. Are we friends? The question caught him off guard. Were they friends? The woman across from him had been a stranger 4 days ago. Yet something had shifted between them during their journey, a fragile trust, perhaps, or a recognition of something familiar in each other's broken places. I'd like to think so, he finally answered. Faith smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. I'd like that too. That night, Zachariah found sleep elusive. He lay on his coat near the fire, acutely aware of Faith's presence a few feet away. The scent of lavender drifted toward him on the night breeze, and he caught himself wondering what it would be like to bury his face in her hair. The thought unsettled him. He hadn't allowed himself to think of a woman that way in years. His life had no room for such complications. Yet here he was, imagining things he had no right to imagine about a grieving widow he barely knew. Zach! Faith's voice startled him. Are you awake? He turned his head to find her watching him from the bedroll. Yes. I keep thinking about what happens when we reach the ranch. You don't need to worry. James and Sarah will welcome you. It's not that. She propped herself up on one elbow. It's Will you stay, or will you leave right away? The question hung between them like a tangible thing. Zachariah sat up, running a hand through his hair. I usually stay a week or two, he said carefully. Why do you ask? Faith looked away. It would be easier, I think, having a familiar face while I adjust. Then I'll stay, he promised, ignoring the voice in his head that warned against extending his visit. Until you're settled. She nodded, lying back down. Thank you. Good night, Zach. Good night, Faith. But sleep remained elusive for both of them that night, each lost in thoughts they were not yet ready to share. On the afternoon of the 5th day, they crested a hill and saw the Montgomery ranch spread below them, a sturdy main house with a wide porch, a large barn, several outbuildings, and fenced pastures where cattle grazed. Smoke rose from the chimney, and even from a distance, they could see the signs of a thriving homestead. It's beautiful, Faith breathed. It is, Zachariah agreed, surprising himself with the pride in his voice. This wasn't his home, he had no home, yet seeing it through Faith's eyes made him appreciate what his brother had built. They rode down the hill, and before they reached the main gate, the front door of the house burst open. 2 small boys raced out, followed by a tall man with the same dark hair as Zachariah but a fuller beard. Uncle Zach, the older boy shouted. Zachariah dismounted and caught the child, who launched himself forward. Peter, you've grown a foot since I saw you last. He set the boy down to greet the younger one. And Michael, you're almost as tall as your brother now. James Montgomery approached more sedately, though his face showed genuine pleasure. Didn't expect you for another month, little brother. His gaze shifted to Faith, still seated on the horse. And you've brought company. Zachariah helped Faith dismount before making introductions. James, this is Faith Wilson. Faith, my brother James. Madam. James tipped his hat, his expression curious but not unwelcoming. Mr. Montgomery, Faith replied, smoothing her travel-worn dress nervously. Your brother has been kind enough to bring me here. He mentioned you might have need of help with your wife expecting. Understanding dawned on James's face. Ah, I see. He shot his brother a look that Zachariah couldn't quite interpret. Well, you're welcome here. Sarah will be glad for the assistance, that's certain. A pregnant woman appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Are you going to keep our guests standing in the yard all day, James Montgomery? James smiled apologetically. Come in, come in. Sarah's made enough stew to feed an army, as usual. As they walked toward the house, James fell into step beside Zachariah, speaking in a low voice. A hired help, is she? Or something more? A woman in need of work and a fresh start, Zachariah replied firmly. Nothing more. If you say so. James didn't sound convinced. But I haven't seen you look at anyone the way you look at her since before the war. Zachariah frowned. You're imagining things. Am I? James clapped him on the shoulder. Well, whatever she is to you, she's welcome here as long as she needs. Inside, Sarah Montgomery enveloped Faith in a warm embrace despite her protruding belly. You poor dear, you must be exhausted from the journey. Come, sit down while I get you some tea. Faith looked overwhelmed by the welcome, but allowed herself to be led to a comfortable chair near the fireplace. The boys hovered nearby, curious about the newcomer but shy. These are my sons, Peter and Michael, Sarah introduced them. Boys, this is Miss Wilson. Faith, please, Faith corrected gently. Faith, Sarah repeated with a warm smile. The boys can show you to the guest room after supper. You'll stay there until we get the cabin behind the house ready for you. The cabin? Faith looked surprised. Where our last help stayed, James explained. It's small but sound. Needs a good cleaning is all. I thank you. That's very generous. Not at all, Sarah assured her. Having help with the household and the boys while this little one arrives will be worth far more than a cabin. She patted her belly. Besides, Zach rarely brings friends to the ranch. You must be special. Faith's cheeks colored, and she glanced at Zachariah, who suddenly found the floorboards fascinating. Zach found me at a difficult time, she said carefully. He's been very kind. That sounds like my brother-in-law, Sarah said. Now let's get some food in you both. You can tell us all about your journey over supper. The meal was abundant and lively, with the boys peppering Zachariah with questions about his travels and Sarah gently drawing Faith into conversation. James watched it all with observant eyes, occasionally catching his brother's gaze with a knowing look that Zachariah steadfastly ignored. After the children were put to bed, the adults sat around the table with coffee. Faith looked more relaxed than Zachariah had seen her, the good food and warm welcome easing some of the tension she'd carried since he found her in the church. "So, Faith," James said, leaning back in his chair, "Zach tells me you're a widow." "James," Sarah admonished. "That's hardly—" "It's all right," Faith assured her. "Yes. My husband died in a mining accident 6 months ago." She kept her explanation simple, omitting the difficulties that had led to her begging in the church. Zachariah was grateful for her discretion. His brother was a good man, but the less said about Faith's desperate circumstances, the fewer questions would be asked about Zachariah's involvement. "I'm sorry for your loss," James said sincerely, "but I'm glad my brother found you when he did. We truly do need the help, especially with the baby coming in 2 months. "I'm happy to earn my keep," Faith replied. "I can cook, clean, sew, and I was a schoolteacher before I married, so I could help with the boys' lessons if you'd like." Sarah's face lit up. "A teacher? Oh, that would be wonderful. I've been trying to keep up with their education, but with the house and the baby." "Then it's settled," James declared. "Faith stays as long as she likes, helping with the household and teaching the boys. We'll pay a fair wage, plus room and board." "And what about you, little brother?" he continued, turning to Zachariah. "How long are we keeping you this time?" Zachariah glanced at Faith, remembering his promise. "I thought I might stay a while. Help with the autumn roundup." James raised his eyebrows in surprise. "You haven't stayed for roundup in years." "Maybe it's time I did." A look passed between the brothers' understanding on James's part, defiance on Zachariah's. "Well," Sarah said, breaking the moment, "we're glad to have you both. Now Faith must be exhausted. Let me show you to your room, dear." As the women left, James refilled their coffee cups and added a splash of whiskey to each. "So," he said when they were alone, "you want to tell me the real story?" Zachariah sighed. "I told you. She needed help. I brought her here." "Aha." James took a sip of his spiked coffee. "And you're staying for roundup because I promised her I'd stay until she was settled." Zachariah stared into his cup. "She's been through enough, James. Lost her husband, her home. The town turned against her when she wouldn't." He trailed off. "Wouldn't what?" "Sell herself," Zachariah said bluntly. "The boarding house owner offered to let her stay if she'd provide services. When she refused, he ruined her reputation." James's expression darkened. "Bastard. I found her begging in the church. She told me no one wanted her." Zachariah's voice softened. "I said I did." James studied his brother's face. "I haven't seen you look like this since Elizabeth." The name sent a jolt through Zachariah. "This isn't like that." "No?" James leaned forward. "Brother, I know you've spent years punishing yourself for what happened, but Elizabeth wouldn't have wanted that. Don't." Zachariah's voice was sharp. "This isn't about Elizabeth. Faith needed help, that's all." "If you say so." James didn't push further. But whether you admit it or not, something's different. I haven't seen you this present in years. Zachariah had no answer for that. Perhaps because, deep down, he feared his brother was right. The next 2 weeks settled into a comfortable routine. Faith quickly proved her worth around the ranch, taking charge of the household with quiet efficiency that allowed Sarah to rest more as her pregnancy advanced. The boys adored their new teacher, sitting attentively for lessons each morning before running off to play in the afternoons. Zachariah divided his time between helping James with the cattle and repairing the small cabin behind the main house. He replaced rotted boards on the porch, fixed the leaky roof, and built new shelves inside. Each improvement was made with Faith in mind, where she might put her books, how she might want the bed position to catch the morning light. In the evenings, they all gathered for supper, sharing stories and laughter. Faith gradually opened up more about her past, her childhood in Pennsylvania, her training as a teacher, her move west with her husband seeking silver fortune. She still spoke little about the months following his death, but the haunted look in her eyes appeared less frequently. For his part, Zachariah found himself opening up more than he had in years. One night, after the others had gone to bed, he and Faith sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the darkness. "You're different here," Faith observed. "More relaxed." "Am I?" She nodded. "On the trail, you were always scanning the horizon, hand near your gun. Here, you laugh more. It's easier to let your guard down when you're home," he said, then paused, surprised by his own words. He hadn't called any place home in a very long time. Faith seemed to notice his discomfort. "Tell me about Elizabeth," she said softly. Zachariah stiffened. "James has a big mouth. He cares about you." Faith turned to face him. "You don't have to tell me, but sometimes speaking a name aloud keeps the person from becoming a ghost." The simple wisdom in her words broke something loose inside him. "She was my fiancée. Before the war." He stared into the darkness. "We were going to marry when I returned. What happened?" "Typhoid, while I was fighting at Vicksburg." His voice was flat, but his hands clenched on the arms of his chair. "Her last letter reached me 2 months after she died." Faith's hand covered his, warm and real. "I'm sorry, Zach. I'd promised to protect her, to build her a home." The bitterness he'd carried for years seeped into his voice. "I couldn't even be there when she needed me most." "You were serving your country," Faith reminded him gently. "Elizabeth would have understood that." "Maybe." He turned his hand over, his fingers intertwining with hers almost of their own accord. "When I came back, I couldn't stay anywhere. Every town, every room felt like a cage. So I kept moving. And now," the question hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was ready to fully acknowledge. "Now," Zachariah looked down at their joined hands. "Now I'm not sure anymore." They sat in silence for a long while, hands linked, each lost in thought. When Faith finally stood to go inside, she squeezed his fingers once before letting go. "Good night, Zach." "Good night, Faith." He remained on the porch long after she'd gone, watching the stars and wondering if the restlessness that had driven him for so many years was finally beginning to fade. The next morning, Faith moved into the cabin. It was small but comfortable now, with fresh curtains Sarah had sewn and a colorful quilt on the bed. Zachariah had built a small bookshelf and filled it with volumes from James's library that Faith could borrow. "It's perfect," she told him as they stood in the doorway. "I haven't had a place of my own since your husband died," he finished when she trailed off. Faith nodded. "Thomas was a good man, but he had big dreams. We moved often, following rumors of rich strikes. This is the first time I've felt." She hesitated. "Settled," Zachariah suggested. "Safe," she corrected, meeting his eyes. Thank you for that. Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings neither had been ready to name. Before Zachariah could respond, Peter came running up, calling for Miss Faith to come see a frog he'd caught, and the moment passed. But it lingered in Zachariah's mind as he worked with James that day, rounding up strays from the north pasture. His brother noticed his distraction. "You're going to get yourself trampled if you don't pay attention," James warned as they rode. "Sorry." Zachariah pulled his focus back to the task at hand. "It's Faith, isn't it?" There seemed little point in denying it. "She's not what I expected." James chuckled. "Women rarely are." He grew serious. "What are your intentions, Zach?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I've spent so long avoiding attachments. I'm not sure I remember how to form them. Seems to me you're doing just fine." James guided his horse around a clump of sage. "I've seen how you look at her when you think no one's watching. And how she looks at you." Zachariah's heart quickened. "How does she look at me?" "Like you're water in the desert." James smiled at his brother's expression. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" It was a question Zachariah pondered for days afterward. He found himself watching Faith more closely, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when concentrating, how her eyes crinkled at the corners when she laughed, the gentle patience she showed with the boys during their lessons. And sometimes he caught her watching him too. Their eyes would meet across the dinner table or the yard, and something unspoken would pass between them before one or both looked away. A week later, Sarah went into labor 2 weeks earlier than expected. The midwife was summoned from town, and James paced anxiously while Zachariah kept the boys occupied with stories and whittling lessons. Faith moved between the kitchen and bedroom, carrying hot water, clean linens, and herbal teas as needed. Her calm efficiency was a steadying presence in the tense household. After hours of labor, a baby's cry pierced the night. Faith emerged from the bedroom, exhausted but smiling. "A girl," she announced. "Mother and daughter are both well." James let out a whoop of joy before rushing to see his wife and new daughter. The boys, awakened by the commotion, were allowed a brief glimpse of their new sister before being ushered back to bed. In the aftermath, Faith and Zachariah found themselves alone in the kitchen, cleaning up the evidence of the long night's vigil. "You were amazing," he told her as she washed the last of the basins. Faith shook her head. "The midwife did the real work. I just helped." "Still," he took the basin from her to dry it. "You knew exactly what to do. Everyone was calmer because of you." She smiled tiredly. "I assisted at births before. In the mining camp, women helped each other." Zachariah set down the basin and gently took her hands. They were red and chapped from hours in hot water. Without thinking, he raised them to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. Faith's breath caught. "Zach, I'm sorry," he said quickly, releasing her hands. No. She recaptured his hands. "Don't apologize." They stood frozen, the kitchen silent except for the ticking of the clock and their uneven breathing. Then Faith rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his brief, soft kiss that ended almost before it began. "I should go," she whispered, stepping back. "It's late." Zachariah wanted to stop her, to pull her back into his arms, but he restrained himself. "I'll walk you to your cabin." The night air was cool as they crossed the yard, neither speaking. At her door, Faith turned to him. "Thank you for the escort." "Faith." Her name was a question and an answer all at once. "What is this between us?" She looked up at him, moonlight silvering her features. "I don't know. I never expected. After Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over. And now I'm afraid," she admitted, "of wanting something I might lose again." Zachariah understood that fear all too well. "I've spent years running from ghosts," he said softly. "But lately, I've been thinking it might be time to stop running." Faith's smile was fragile but real. "Maybe for both of us." He leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Get some rest. We can talk tomorrow." As he walked back to the main house, Zachariah felt lighter than he had in years, as if a burden he'd carried since the war was finally beginning to lift. The next few weeks brought changes to the ranch. Sarah recovered quickly from the birth, but was grateful for Faith's continued help with the household and children. The baby named Grace brought a new energy to the family, and even Zachariah found himself enchanted by his tiny niece. More significantly, his relationship with Faith deepened. They found moments to be alone walking after supper, sitting on her cabin porch in the evenings, riding to a nearby stream on Sunday afternoons. Their conversations ranged from childhood memories to future hopes, each revelation bringing them closer. The physical aspect of their relationship progressed slowly, respectfully. Kisses became more frequent, more passionate, but both were careful not to rush what was growing between them. One evening in late October, with autumn painting the landscape in gold and crimson, Zachariah took Faith to a hilltop overlooking the ranch. They spread a blanket on the ground and watched the sunset turn the sky to fire. "I have something to tell you," he said as the last rays disappeared behind the mountains. Faith turned to him, her expression curious. "What is it?" "James offered me a partnership in the ranch." He watched her face carefully. "A third of the operation would be mine. I'd help manage the cattle, maybe start breeding horses." Hope bloomed in her eyes. "You're considering it?" "I'm more than considering it." He took her hands in his. "I'm accepting on one condition." "What condition?" "That you'll stay too." Zachariah drew a deep breath. "Not as an employee, but as my wife." Faith's eyes widened. "Zach, I know it hasn't been long," he continued quickly. "And if you need more time, I understand. But I love you, Faith. I think I started falling for you that first day in the church when you looked at me with those green eyes full of determination despite everything you'd been through." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I never thought I'd find this again," she whispered. "After Thomas died, I was so alone. And then you found me and you said, 'I do,'" he finished, smiling at the memory. "I meant it then, and I mean it now in a different way. I do want you, Faith. Not just for now, but for always." "I love you too," she said, her voice breaking. "And yes, Zachariah Montgomery, I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the emotion he'd held back for so long. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "No more running," he promised, "for either of us." Faith smiled through her tears. "No more running." They were married a month later in the same church where they'd first met, though they traveled back to Willow Creek for the ceremony. The town that had once rejected Faith now watched in curious silence as she walked down the aisle to the man who had changed her life. Mrs. Baker was there, beaming with satisfaction at the match she'd tacitly approved months before. Even the boarding house owner attended, though he kept to the back pew and avoided Zachariah's gaze. After the ceremony, as they prepared to return to the ranch to their home, Faith paused on the church steps. "Do you remember what I said to you that first day?" she asked, looking up at her new husband. "You said no one wanted you," Zachariah recalled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Faith smiled, radiant in her simple white dress. "And you said, 'I do.'" He kissed her softly. "The best 2 words I ever spoke." As they rode away from Willow Creek, Faith's arms wrapped securely around his waist, Zachariah Montgomery finally understood what he'd been searching for in all his years of wandering. Not escape from his past, but a future worth staying for. And he had found it in the most unexpected place, with a woman begging at a church, who had been as lost as he was until they found each other. The road ahead might not always be easy, but they would face it together, two wounded souls who had learned that sometimes the greatest courage isn't in running away, but in standing still long enough to let love find you.